This episode of Lex Out Loud is brought to you by my patrons, readers, and listeners. If you'd like to learn how to support this podcast, visit lexstarwalker.com/support. You're listening to episode 59 of Lex Out Loud, Writing Science Fiction. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. This show is a chronicle of my journey as a science fiction novelist. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I am Lex Starwalker, and I am Out Loud, coming back at you with another episode, another discussion about our favorite topic, or at least mine, writing. So I hope everyone is doing well. I hope everyone's enjoying the summer, depending on what part of the country or the world you're in. You may be enjoying it more or less right now. I'm pretty lucky living here in the Pacific Northwest in close to Seattle, Washington. We've had really great weather so far this year. At least I consider it really great. Opinions may differ, but it's been like mid-60s most days. We've had a lot of sunny, beautiful days, and that might be a little cool for some people, but for me, it's perfect. I can just wear comfortable clothes, and I'm not too cold, I'm not too hot. And a lot of the U.S. these past few weeks have been in triple-digit temperatures, 100 or above Fahrenheit, and that's not fun. So we do have a bit of a heat wave coming here in a few days. It looks like we're going to get up in the 80s, maybe pushing 90. So yeah, I'll be glad when that's over. But so far, it's been a lot cooler than it normally is this time of year. So I've been really happy. But yeah, hopefully, you're enjoying the weather wherever you're at. And yeah, enough about the weather, enough small talk. Let's get to what we're really here to talk about, which is writing. So this is the first of a series of episodes I decided I'd do. I really don't at this point know exactly how many episodes there will be in this series. I can say I'm pretty sure there'll be at least 2, maybe more. And I wanted to title this series something like At the Feet of the Masters, Writing Advice from Some of My Favorite Authors. And, we can say that's the title, but it's really long for a podcast title, especially considering that's the title of the series. And then I would add the title of the episode after that. So that's just too long. So I think I'm going to call this episode 15 Writing Tips from Stephen King. So yeah, I just gave it away what I'm talking about today, but you probably saw the title of the episode already anyway. So one of my favorite things to do as a writer, or just in general, but it's because I'm a writer, is to listen to other writers that I admire, other writers whose work I enjoy, talk about the craft, talk about their lives and how they became writers, talk about their process of writing and how they approach it, how they think about it. I just find it really fascinating, and I always learn a lot, and it's just a lot of fun for me. And it's really interesting to me how different we all are as writers, how different our processes are, how we approach writing and how we actually go about it, and also how different our approach to the business is. Yeah, it's just really fascinating to me. And it seems like every writer you hear talk about it, their story is different than every other story you've heard. And I just find it really interesting. But not only is it interesting, but I learn a lot from it too. So it's no secret to listeners of this show that one of my favorite writers is Stephen King. And it's probably even less of a secret to you all that my favorite book on the craft of writing is On Writing by Mr. King. Now, as the quick aside here, I talk about On Writing a lot on this show, and some of you may wonder why I talk about it so much and why I maybe don't mention other craft books that maybe you've heard of. Maybe some of you even think that that's the only book on writing I've ever read, and that's definitely not the case. I've read numerous books on writing, numerous craft books through the years. And to be blunt and honest about it, most of them have been a waste of time for me. A few of them have been entertaining or interesting in some way, but On Writing by Stephen King is the only one that I've read that really taught me anything as a writer or about writing that I didn't already know, hadn't already figured out for myself. You know, most of these craft books that you see, or at least the ones that I've read, either share the most basic aspects of writing, like their epiphanies, or they present concepts as if they're novel ideas that are things that anyone who's read a lot of books has already figured out for themselves. So, you know, most of the craft books I've read, it's just what seems to me a bunch of just glaringly obvious stuff that anybody who's anything other than a complete novice to writing and reading already knows. So that's why I say they're a waste of time, because I don't, other than maybe being a little entertaining or you know, reading some good anecdotes from the writer's life, they don't really teach me anything. So yeah, unless you're someone who's never written before and hasn't read much, most of what a lot of these books have to say will kind of have you saying, well, duh, obviously. So yeah, and honestly, these books and these kinds of books are far from the best way to learn how to be a better writer. But we'll get more into that later. Some better ways to learn how to be a better writer than reading books on writing. But all that said, Stephen King's book on writing is an exception. It is a book I've learned a lot from. It's a book I continue to learn from. I think at the time of recording this, I've read it 4 or 5 times. I've honestly lost count of how many times I've read it. When I've sat down to, quote, read it cover to cover, I've always listened to the Audible version, which is narrated by Stephen King himself and is excellent. And if you haven't read the book, I highly recommend that version because he's a great storyteller and it's very entertaining and easy and fun to listen to. But I also have a copy on my Kindle that I often refer to as like a reference book and go and look up things in it that I kind of remember, but I want to read it again. So I've learned a lot from it. I continue to learn a lot from it. And it's amazing because the majority of the book isn't really so much about writing per se. It's more some of Stephen King's memoirs and stories and anecdotes about his life and kind of showing you, the reader, how he came to be a writer and kind of some of the formative experiences he had that led him to being the person he is now and the kind of writer that he is now. So that's what, you know, the majority of the book is about. Relatively little of the book is actually writing advice. And yet still, it's by far the most useful book on the topic I've read. And I do find the memoir stuff to be useful as well. So today, what I'm going to talk about is some writing tips that Stephen King gives in On Writing. I've chosen 15 of them. And my goal here today isn't so much to pass along his writing advice to you. I would much rather that you go read the book or listen to the book and learn from Stephen King himself, as opposed to I'm going to summarize it for you. But rather, what I'm trying to do today is to give some commentary on this advice and maybe give some anecdotes or some of my own experience in support of these points that Stephen King makes in the book and kind of why I agree with them and kind of my take on them. So as I said, I'm hoping to do a series of these episodes, and I mentioned I'm sure I'll do at least 2 because the other one I know that I'll do is one on Andy Weir, which I believe is how you correctly pronounce his name. I've been saying it wrong all these years. But yeah, I recently saw a really cool interview with him. I linked it in our Discord. Unfortunately, it is on Facebook. I don't know why, but it is on Facebook. So you have to have a Facebook login to watch it, which really sucks. Believe me, I'm the last person to want to promote Facebook, but it's the only place that I know of that this interview exists, and it's the most recent interview with him that I know of. He's recently become a father. I think his son, I believe, but his child is a little over a year old now. And since that happened, since he had a baby or his wife had a baby, he hasn't been doing interviews so much. So to my knowledge, this is the most recent one that he's done. And it was a really great interview, and I got some good stuff from it. And there's definitely some things from it that I'd love to talk about on the show. And since then, I've found some more older interviews of his that I'm going to watch. And I think once I do that, I'll have enough material for an episode just sharing with you some of the things I learned from Andy Weir. But today, we're talking about Stephen King. So as I said, this is going to be 15 writing tips from Stephen King from his book On Writing. And this is not all the advice given in the book. So there's more. If you want more, go check out the book. So the first piece of advice is read a lot. And as much as I can through this, I'm going to give you some quotes from Stephen King himself, pretty much mostly, if not all, coming from the book On Writing. So Stephen King has a great quote on this that I just quoted on Twitter the other day that I really like. And he says, if you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. Simple as that. And yeah, we could just end it right there. But let's expound a little bit on that. So, what he points out in the book is, first you're reading and you're writing. And in the beginning of your writing, you're kind of copying other writers. You're kind of reproducing what you've seen writers that you've read and enjoyed do. And then as you write more, little by little, you begin to develop your own style that's influenced by these other writers, but it's not exactly the same. Now, a lot of writers out there can't tell you how they do what they do, or they can't tell you very well. And even when a writer can communicate how they do what they do, there's a good chance that their methods, their particular approach is not going to work for you. We're all different, and our brains all work and think a little differently. So you're going to need to develop your own style and your own process, your own approach as a writer. And no one can really teach you that. You have to teach yourself. So how do you learn then? If no one can really teach you how to write and how to develop your own style, then how do you learn that? Well, the answer is really simple: by reading. You read a lot, and you read as widely as possible, not just in one genre, not just from one author. You read as many authors as you can, as many genres as you can, as many types of books as you can, and then you read some more. And this is really the only way you will ever truly become a great writer. So, anytime you hear someone say that they're a writer, but they don't read, I don't know. I'm very, I'm very doubting of that person's chances of success. And something I will add here that I don't think Stephen King says this in the book, but I think is an important thing to add here, is when you are reading, anytime you encounter a word that you don't know, or you're not sure exactly what it means and you're trying to figure it out by context, look it up. You'll know after you read some of a given author, you'll know which authors you need a dictionary for and which you don't. These days, most of the books I read, I don't need a dictionary. But I do know there are certain authors when I read them that, it's good to have a dictionary on hand, because they will occasionally use a word that I don't know. Either I've never seen it before, or I'm just not sure exactly what it means. And yeah, when you encounter that, you should look it up in an actual dictionary, which is not to say it has to be a, dead tree, dictionary of a paper book. There are dictionaries online. Personally, I have the Merriam-Webster app on my phone, which is not free, but it's not expensive. It's a yearly thing. I think it's like $5 or something a year. And I have that app on my phone. So, I have my phone with me. Anytime I look up a word or I come across a word I don't know, I look it up. If you're reading on Kindle, You probably know this, but you can just highlight any word in a book on Kindle and it will give you a definition, and you can even choose from a few different dictionaries. If you're in the U.S., if you're dealing with American English, the Webster Dictionary is the source for you. That's what you want to use. If you're elsewhere in the world, then that will be different. For instance, I think if you're in England, I think the Oxford Dictionary is the preferred one for British English. Don't quote me on that. I don't know. That's just what I think, but I don't know because I don't write in British English, so I don't really worry about it. So yeah, look up words you don't know. This is a chance for you to grow your vocabulary, and vocabulary is a fundamental tool of a writer. But yeah, read a lot, and this is something that never ends. It's not like you get to a certain point as a writer and you don't need to read anymore. Stephen King, I mean, I don't even know how many dozens, if not hundreds of books the man's published, and he still reads a lot. At the end of my version of On Writing that I have on Kindle, there are 3 appendices, each of which have close to 100 books that he recommends that he's read that he thinks are worth reading and will help you grow as a writer. None of these are craft books, by the way. They're just novels written by people who know what they're doing. And like I said, each of these appendices is close to 100 books. And, these are books he's read in a span of 10 years or less. So the man is reading dozens of books a year in addition to all the writing he does. And this continues to this day. It's not like he got to a point and he's like, oh, I know everything now. I don't need to read anymore. So again, anytime you hear a writer or a wannabe writer say they don't read or they don't have time to read, I'd question that a bit. They should be reading. We should all be reading as much as we can, because that's how we learn. That's how we get better. Because there's just a lot in writing that it's very subtle. It's very intuitive. The writer who's doing it, they can't necessarily explain to you how they're doing what they're doing or why, because a lot of it they're not doing consciously. It's just it's instinct. But the way you gain those instincts is by reading a lot and reading very widely and kind of assembling this collection in your mind of things that you like and things that you've seen that you don't like, and trying to emulate the things that you like to the point that resource base of things that you like is broad enough and you've worked with it long enough that you start developing your own style instead of just copying what other people are doing. But in the beginning, we're all copying what writers we like are doing. So the second piece of advice is that the good ideas will stay with you. I often hear writers worry about forgetting good ideas, and maybe they'll keep a notebook by their bed in case they have a good idea in the middle of the night. They can get up and write it. Now, I want to point out here, I was recently talking with a writer friend of mine, and she was talking about, because I shared this idea with her, and she was talking about, that makes sense for like kind of big ideas that like you might base a novel on or something like that. But that she'll often, while she's going to sleep or even in the middle of the night, have an idea for like a piece of dialogue or the way a certain scene could go, like something really specific. And yeah, that kind of thing you might forget, and I'm just like that. Just the other night, I was laying in bed, waiting to go to sleep. And I was actually talking about my book that I'm editing now, Critical Balance, with my wife. And I suddenly had like a whole bunch of ideas of some changes I wanted to make with some of the characters, some scenes I wanted to add, some changes I wanted to make to certain scenes. And yeah, I got up and I grabbed my laptop and I got all that down because it was really specific stuff. And it wasn't just one idea, it was a bunch of stuff. And I'm like, I'll probably remember this in the morning, but I don't want to take the risk that I might forget some of this because this is all stuff I want to do. So I did get up and type that out. What we're talking about here when we say the good ideas will stay with you are kind of like the foundational ideas that you'd base a story on. Those will tend to stay with you. And again, those are usually ideas that can be stated in a few words or at most a sentence. They're just little seeds that you would build a story on. So, a lot of times people who aren't writers or who haven't written a lot will think that coming up with the good ideas to base stories on is the hard part of writing. Like that's what's hard. And it's like, once you have the idea, like the hard part's done. When in reality, it's actually one of the easier parts of writing, if not the easiest. Coming up with a good idea is actually the easy part. Writing the story and turning that idea into a good story that people are going to want to read, that's where the work lies. So, don't worry so much about, the good ideas and remembering the good ideas. As Stephen King says, over the years, you will tend to remember the good ideas and you'll tend to forget the bad ideas. So it's kind of its own way of sorting them out is, well, if you forget an idea, it probably wasn't that great. But if you remember an idea over weeks or months or years, then chances are better it's a decent idea. And oftentimes, Stephen King says this, and it's something I've found for myself as well. Oftentimes, the best ideas are ones that percolate in the back of your mind and stay with you for years. For instance, some of the core ideas that the setting for my sci-fi novels is based on are ideas that have been swimming around in my head for over 13 years. And they're still there. I never forgot them. I never gave up on them because they're ideas I'm really excited about. So I'm never going to forget about them unless I undergo some traumatic injury or something. So the good ideas will stay with you. The bad ideas will fall away as time goes on. So, it may not be a great idea to sit and write down every idea you come up with that could be a story, because then it's on paper, it's forever, and you might end up, quote, remembering some bad ideas that you would have otherwise forgotten. Okay, writing tip number 3 is avoid distraction when you're writing or when you're working on your writing. So a big part of this is creating a good writing environment and then eliminating all possible distractions. So the ideal writing environment is a room that you can have all to yourself with a door that you can close. So when it's time to write or it's time to work on your writing, close all unneeded tabs on your web browser. And me personally, the only tabs I allow myself to have open on my web browser when I'm actually writing is a dictionary, which again, I have the Merriam-Webster app, which part of that is you also get member access to the Merriam-Webster website, which is like a web-based dictionary, and thesaurus, by the way. Both the app and the website are both a dictionary and a thesaurus. So I have the dictionary open and I have Wikipedia open. And that's it, nothing else. So close any unneeded apps on your web browser. And, if you don't have the discipline to limit yourself to what you absolutely need, then close the web browser altogether. And, I think Stephen King actually, not non-writing, I don't think, but elsewhere, I think he said not to do any research while you're doing the first draft. Now, I don't follow that rule personally. Like I said, I have Wikipedia open, I have the dictionary open, but I also have the self-discipline to limit the research I will allow myself to do during a first draft. So when I'm drafting a novel, I will allow myself to look up something on Wikipedia and maybe spend a few, like 10 minutes or less, a few minutes looking into something to make sure I know what I'm talking about. Just because I've found that for me personally, I like to be sure of myself when I'm writing, especially, if I'm bringing in a fact or an asset or an aspect of life that I'm not well versed in myself from my own experience. I like to know what I'm talking about even in the first draft, so I don't have to doubt it. And it just saves a lot of time in the editing process if I get things closer in the first draft. And like I said, I have the discipline not to go down a rabbit hole and I'm on Wikipedia for an hour instead of writing my novel. I can get on there, get the little factoid I need, and then get back to writing the book. So, not everybody can do that. Some people are more easily distracted than others, or some people have more discipline than others. So, whatever works for you. So yeah, eliminate distractions, get rid of any distractions on your computer. shut down Twitter and YouTube and all that crap. Avoid distracting music. Now, a lot of people write to music, and I do myself, but avoid music that's going to distract you from what you're doing. Close the door. That prevents distractions from the outside world, prevents, if there's other people in your house or your apartment, prevents them from coming in the room and bothering you. Close the blinds so you can't look out the window and be distracted by things. I mean, I do this. Unfortunately, I don't have my own writing room anymore now that I'm in an apartment for a while. But when I had my house, I had the luxury of my own little room, and I closed the door, I closed the blinds every time. Anything to prevent any possible distractions. In this area, on this topic, I have personally recently, since I've been in this apartment, found noise canceling headphones to be a game changer. I wish I'd started using these a long time ago. They cut out so many distractions, barking dogs, people outside talking, things like that. And I am someone I can get in the zone. I can get in a flow state and be very, very focused. But at the same time, I can be very easily distracted by an outside sound or something like that. And then, you lose your rhythm and it takes time to find that again. So again, I listen to music without vocals because lyrics are very distracting. And great sources for music like that are classical, although you have to be careful with classical because some classical music does have vocals. And even if it's in Latin or whatever they're screaming, I still find it distracting personally, even though I don't know Latin. And also movie soundtracks, as long as, again, it's not, songs with vocals. But a lot of movie soundtracks, it's all instrumental. It's all orchestral. So those are great sources of non-distracting music. Now, personally, I like creating a playlist for a book that I can listen to while I'm writing. And, this is something I take a little time before I start the book and I make the playlist. And then that way, when I'm writing, I don't have to waste any time finding music to listen to. I just have this playlist that I listen to, and it's long enough. I think the one I have now is over 8 hours long. That I just start at different points in the playlist every day, so I'm not hearing the same tracks every day. And I find music, all non-vocal music again, that captures the tone and the mood that I'm looking for in the book. And it not only does it help filter out distractions and keep me from hearing noises and sounds that might distract me, but it also kind of sets my personal mood and emotional state so that I can kind of be in that place when I'm writing the book, and kind of have the tone that I want. And yeah, again, it drowns out any distractions. All right. Tip number 4 is have a daily routine. King describes the writing process as a kind of self-hypnosis. And I think he's very much correct about that. I mean, I completely agree. He describes it as kind of like dreaming while you're awake. You learn to put yourself in this state where you're kind of hypnotizing yourself or you're in a waking dream. And that's how you're able to, see what's happening and write it down. And another part of this is the human mind is very habit oriented. So the best way to make sure that you do something on the regular, whether that's writing or working out or whatever it is to make that thing a habit. So you just do it every day automatically without even thinking about it. So in order to make that happen, you need to set a time aside for writing every day at the same time every day and in the same place every day, ideally. And every day means every day. I mean, if you're going to make something a habit, you can't take weekends off. It's got to be every day. Set up a routine, a ritual. And for more on this topic of how to use the habit part of the brain to both do the things that you want to do every day and to also break bad habits that you have that maybe you don't want anymore, I highly recommend the book Atomic Habits. It's all about that, and it's very effective. It's helped me a lot. But kind of the idea behind this is again making it habitual, so you don't have to force yourself to write every day. You don't have to motivate yourself to write every day. If you're going to rely on motivation, you're doomed to fail because you're not going to be motivated every day. That's just not how we work as human beings. You cannot rely on motivation to get you through every day. The way to do it every day is to make it a habit. And a big part of making it a habit is making it a part of a routine. So I, like a lot of us, maybe all of us, I have a morning routine. Every morning when I wake up, I do the same things every day. I get up, I make the bed, I go to the bathroom, I have certain medications I have to take first thing in the morning. I start a pot of coffee, I have my breakfast, and then I pour my cup of coffee, and then I go get on the computer and I start my writing day. So that is my routine, and it's become a habit for me. So I can do all those things on autopilot. I can be on autopilot, not even thinking about what I'm doing, and I will get up, I'll make the bed, I'll go to the bathroom, I'll take my medicine, I'll make coffee, I'll eat breakfast, I'll get my cup of coffee and find myself in my chair sitting at the computer ready to write. And it's a habit. It happens automatically. I don't even have to think about it anymore. And, that's the biggest part of the battle, right? Like once you're sitting there in your chair with the computer on and your hands on the keyboard, you're halfway there, right? Now all you got to do is start typing and make it relevant to the thing you're working on. And yeah, so that works really well. So have a daily routine. All right, writing tip number 5 is write every day. So this is I guess this could all have been one tip, but I wanted to break it up a little bit. So, you have your daily routine, which gets you in the chair, ready to write every day. And then the next part of that is to write every day and to have a goal, a daily goal that you hit every day. For Stephen King, it's 6 pages or 2,000 words. So Stephen King says, once I start work on a project, I don't stop and I don't slow down unless I absolutely have to. If I don't write every day, the characters begin to stale off in my mind. They begin to seem like characters instead of real people. The tale's narrative cutting edge starts to rust, and I begin to lose my hold on the story's plot and pace. So, I would argue that this is part of the making it a habit. Not only is there a risk if you don't make it a habit, if you don't write every day, not only is there a risk that you won't do it every day or you won't do it as often as you want to, but there's also what he's talking about here where you lose the thread, where you start forgetting what you were doing or you lose the momentum that you've built up with this story that you're writing. So write every day and then have a goal. Words per day is what works best if you can do it. If you're someone where your writing time is limited, then instead of words per day, probably the best thing for you is time, hours per day. So for instance, if you're someone where you've carved out time to write every day and you only have an hour or you only have 2 hours, then your goal should be that 1 or 2 hours, whatever it is. But if that isn't you, if you're someone where, you can carve out the time that you need every day, then the best thing is a words per day goal. Now, Stephen King's is 2,000 words per day. I tried that. And for me personally, where I'm at right now, that was too much. I found for me, my best or the best writing goal for me is 1,000 words per day. And that is your minimum. So you are allowed to write more than that. I'm allowed to write as many more than 1,000 words as I can, or as I want to, or as I feel like it. But I am not allowed to leave that room until I write my 1,000 words every day. And that's the rule, and that's the goal, and I stick to it, and it works really well. So, a key part of this is finding the right goal that works for you. And we're all going to have different numbers because we're all different. And it doesn't really matter what the number is. It doesn't matter if your number is less than 2,000. It doesn't matter if it's less than 1,000. What matters is that you're hitting that goal every single day. And I've done a few episodes of this podcast on that. So you can check those out for more of my thoughts on how to find the right goal for you. So as I said, I've done episodes just wholly on this topic, so I don't want to go too much into it right now. You can go check out those episodes. But just in a nutshell, you want to set up a pattern of success. Setting a goal and achieving that goal is a positive emotional experience. And all of us as writers, to some degree, are emotional creatures, and emotions do affect our productivity and how much we enjoy what we're doing. So setting a goal and then hitting that goal feels really good. It makes you feel good about yourself. It makes you feel like, hey, I can do this. This is fun. I'm awesome, and you're just raring to go for the next day. On the flip side, failing to hit a goal is the opposite. You don't feel good about yourself. You start to wonder if you really have what it takes. And it's a negative experience, and it makes it even more difficult the next day to get going and to, quote, force yourself to write again. So that's why I say you're much better off setting a lower goal that you can consistently hit every day than you are setting a higher goal that you're going to fail more often than not, or even if you're going to fail occasionally. Because any time you fail is not going to feel good, and it's not going to motivate you to keep going. It's going to demotivate you. So you don't want to fail at all. That's why my goal is pretty low. And my goal is below my average. And again, just to kind of nutshell things, I personally recommend, if you want to know what should my goal be, is, write every day for a couple weeks, keep track of how many words you write every day, find the average of that, and then take 10% off of that, and that's your daily writing goal. So your writing goal, you've written for let's say you've written for 2 weeks every day, and you average out how many words, you wrote every day, and you take the average, you add them all up, divide by 14, and you come up with 1,000 words. So you averaged 1,000 words over the last 2 weeks each day. So your target is 10% less than that, which is 900 words. So your goal every day is less than you just achieved every day for 2 weeks. And you might be like, well, why would I set a goal so low? Well, remember, you can go past that. There's no rule saying that once you hit 900 words, you have to stop. If you're in a flow state, if you know what comes next, if you have the time, keep going until you want to stop. But the rule is you can't stop until you hit that goal, which in this example is 900 words. So the whole idea here is you don't ever want to not hit that goal. And then, if you're consistently hitting 900 words for a long time and it feels too easy, then you can start to incrementally increase it. But as soon as you find yourself ever failing your daily writing goal, I think the thing to do there is not beat yourself up, not redouble your efforts, but just decrease that goal by 10% and keep going. So yeah, you have your goal every day, you sit down, you lock yourself in that room, and you don't leave the room until you hit that goal. Now, I do allow myself, a bathroom break or, go refill my drink, but I literally, I go to the bathroom and I go right back in, and I don't talk to my wife. I don't look out the window. I don't check social media. I'm not allowed to do anything other than go to the bathroom and refill my drink until that 1,000 words is written. Now, a lot of times online, I'll see people kind of whine about writing every day and try to make all these justifications for why you don't need to write every day. And, maybe this is a point to once again make clear where I'm coming from. I want to be a published writer. I want to write commercial fiction. I want to do this for a living. And in order to be successful at that and achieve those goals, I need to not only write a great book, I need to consistently be able to write great books one after another, at least a book a year, preferably more. And this is how you do that. I'm not someone that just wants to, write for fun or maybe write a few good books in my lifetime. I'm someone that wants to churn out books and be able to make a living at it. And the only way you can do that is to, do the work and do it every day. Now, there are writers out there who don't do that. And we can all, I'm sure, think of some very successful writers who've sold a lot of books who, maybe take 10 years or more to write a book. And I'm not going to name names. We can all know who those people are or think of examples of people like that. But they're the exception, not the rule. You can't count on, or you shouldn't count on, being the exception, not if you want to succeed. You can't depend on a miracle or winning the lottery or anything like that. At least that's not a good strategy. You can't rely on being the 1 in a million or 1 in a billion person. It's just not likely, right? So, another thing to keep in mind here is, if you want to be published, if you want a big publisher to basically hire you to write books for them, you got to understand they don't want you to write a book for them. They don't want you to write a few books for them. They want you to continually write books for them for the foreseeable future. They don't want to buy one book from you. They don't want to buy 3 books from you. They want to buy 1 or more books per year from you for quite a while. They have to make a pretty sizable investment in you. So they're putting up a lot in the beginning. And the only way they're going to get a return on that investment and actually have their investment in you be profitable is if you write numerous books for them and you can get those books out quickly and they don't have to wait 10 years for every book. Now, again, if you sell ridiculous numbers of copies, they can make their investment back on that for that first book. But again, you can't rely on being that exceptionary writer. You can't rely on being the 1 in a million. It's kind of funny. I think it was a few episodes ago, I talked with you about reading a book Stephen King wrote called Later. And it's a book about this character who can see the spirits of people who've recently died. And the main character's mother, the book starts when the character's like 7 years old or something. And by the end of the book, he's a teenager. So the main character's mother is a major character in the story. And the main character's mother is a literary agent. And I thought it was really interesting. This book is written by Stephen King, obviously an author, obviously, probably knows a thing or two about agents and how they work, obviously. And this character in this book, the main character's mother, who's an agent, mentions at one point how for her, a gold mine writer is someone who will be able to put out a book a year. How, she has these writers that she represents that, she gets a book from them every few years or something. And, from her perspective, that doesn't really pay the bills. For her as an agent, what she wants to be able to pay the bills and have some kind of financial security in her life is she wants writers that can write a good book every year. So I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, a lot of writers do more than that. And it depends on your genre. It's one thing to write 2 romances or 2 urban fantasies a year that are less than 100,000 words, as opposed to writing 2 epic fantasies a year that are, 150,000 words, right? So it kind of depends on your genre and things like that and what you're doing. But yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting. So part of being an attractive to an agent or a publisher is being able to produce on a regular basis and not taking forever to do that. And the key to that is just like any other job you're going to do, you got to show up to work every day, right? So yeah, I was talking about, people online who complain about that or make excuses for why they don't write every day or they shouldn't have to write every day. And, some of these are just people that aren't cut out to write and probably really don't want to write. But taking those people aside, I think a lot of what's happening there is people who just don't have a lot of time. A lot of times these people are parents and they're like, hey, I'm a parent. A parent's a full-time job. You don't get days off. The workday never really ends. And I totally get that. But again, for those people or someone in, a similar situation, like they work 2 jobs or something like that, for people like that, the key is figuring out what you can do every day. I I don't want to get into medical stuff again, but I've had some issues with my heart, like nothing super serious, but just my heart rate has been a little high recently because of this illness I had. And so I'm trying to get back into these mindfulness meditations that I used to do to kind of help with that and help with stress and stuff like that. And also, help with my creativity and my writing. And it was interesting. I was reading the beginning of the book, and he was talking about, this takes a half hour a day or whatever. And he's like, you're not going to just find a half hour a day to do this. He's like, you're going to have to make that time, because if you had a half hour every day of free time that you weren't using for anything, you would have filled it up with something, right? Like we're so busy. If you just every day had a half hour where you had nothing to do, you would have found something to do with that half hour by now. So the only way you're going to be able to do these meditations for half an hour every day is you're going to have to carve out that time. So I would say the same thing is with writing. If you're just starting out, no matter your situation, whether you're a parent or whether you work 2 jobs or not, you're not just going to find an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours every day just sitting there waiting for you that you can write. You're going to have to carve that time out somewhere, somehow. So, if you are really busy like that, I would say the answer is not to just give yourself a pass on writing every day. The answer is to find an amount of time and a time that you can realistically commit to every day. Maybe it's only half an hour. Maybe it's only 15 minutes. But I tell you what, 15 minutes every single day is a hell of a lot better than a couple hours once in a blue moon. It really is. So find what's realistic for you, and don't worry how small that number is. I mean, there have been books written on lunch hours before. And I wish I could remember, because I've heard specific authors talk about writing specific books while they were working a job, and they literally wrote the entire book on their lunch hours, 20, 30 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, for however many weeks that took. So, yeah. And if you're, so I said, these people that rationalize not writing every day, some of it's they don't have the time or feel like they don't have the time. And for that, it's just finding something realistic that you can do. And I think the other big group of people there are people who have tried this, and it's not so much that they don't have the time, but they've gotten discouraged because they find it difficult to actually write every day. And I think a lot of times what's going on there is they're setting a goal that's too high for them. So for those people, I would recommend cut that goal down. Whatever you're trying to do, cut it down. And again, like I said, take your average over a certain period of time and do 90% of that. Decrease that by 10% and use that as your goal, and build a pattern of success. Now, I will also say, because those of you that have listened to this show for long are probably jumping up and down, screaming at me, because I don't actually, or at least when I did my last book, I did not actually write every day. I wrote 6 days a week. I wrote Monday through Saturday, and I took Sundays off. So again, everybody's process is different, and what works for Stephen King is he writes every day. He doesn't take any days off for holidays or anything else. He writes every single day because he's found that's what he needs to do to be successful. I'm still learning my process. And when I wrote this last book, I felt like committing to 7 days a week with no breaks I wasn't sure if I could do that. And again, it's more important to succeed at your goals and have a smaller goal than it is to have a bigger goal and maybe fail. So I actually started with 5 days a week when I started the novel. And then at some point I went to 6, and I was able to do 6, no problem. So as I start book 2, I think I'm going to try the 7 days a week, because although on the one hand, it was kind of nice to have a quote day off, on the other hand, I did feel like I lose some momentum on that day. And my goal of 1,000 words, it's really low. If you're someone that does write on the regular, probably to you, that seems like a pretty low daily goal. So that's low enough that I feel like even if I'm not feeling it, I can get out 1,000 words every day of the week. yeah, that then I can leverage more the habitual, I do this every day thing, which will make me more consistent. And also part of it is training your brain to be creative at that time every day and to get into that kind of dream state just automatically, because your brain knows, oh, every day at 10 a.m. or whatever it is, or every day after I have my cup of coffee, I'm going to write. And so it gets used to that, and you don't have to get into the zone every day. You find you're already there because your brain knows what's coming next and it's ready. So you can really only get that if you're doing it every single day and not taking any days off. So that is what I'm going to try to do with this next book. But just full disclosure, in the past, I've done 6 days a week, not 7. Do as I say, not as I do, right? So yeah, if you want to hear more on this subject, check out the show notes for this episode at lexstarwalker.com. And I'll have links to those other episodes where I talked about this in more detail. And also my personal experience and how I came to this philosophy and, setting too high of a goal and what happened with that and all that. All right, tip number 6, kind of again in the same vein here. Write a first draft with the door closed. And, for Stephen King, he can do this in 3 months because he does 2,000 words a day, 7 days a week, every day, no days off. My last book, it took me about 6 months, which I guess makes sense because my goal is half of his. I was doing 1,000 words a day. But Stephen King says the first draft of a book, even a long one, should take no more than 3 months, the length of a season. So again, that's what he does. That's what works for him. I mean, definitely, if you can do that, that's awesome. That's really going to help you be able to produce more than a book a year. I'm pretty happy with the 6 months I did last time. I'm curious to see this next book when I start it, how long it takes. I'm hopeful it will take less than 6 months because again, I'm going to be doing 7 days a week instead of 6. And I had a lot of difficulty in the beginning of the last book. And I actually, when I started, my goal was 2,000 words and I wasn't hitting it. And there were lots of days I didn't write at all because I was discouraged. So I think it was at least a month, if not more, before I changed my goal to 1,000 words and I started reliably writing every day. So I think that will make the second book quicker because I won't have that problem at the beginning. And also, when I started the last book, I really had no idea where I was going with it. Where, this is the second book in the series, and I have a much better idea of what this book is going to be about than I did the last one. So I'm anticipating I will be able to write this more quickly than I did the last one, which would be awesome. Maybe 5 months, maybe less. Also, there is the possibility that I may be able to increase the daily writing goal, but honestly, I probably won't even try to do that this book. What I think I'll do is I'm going to do the 7 days, and I'm just going to say 1,000 words is my goal. And once I finish the book, I will, because I keep stats of all my, what I do every day. Once I finish it, I will figure out what my daily average is and take 90% of that. And if that is higher than 1,000, then that will be my new goal going forward. But yeah, I think since I'm going from 6 to 7 days a week, I think that's enough for this book. And again, I can always go beyond that goal anyway. So I'd rather, again, succeed at my goal every day than try to do too much and try to up that goal and maybe not hit it. So yeah, and you write that first draft with the door closed. So part of that is what I've already talked about, eliminating distractions. But the other part of the writing that first draft with the door closed is that you are not looking for feedback from other people. Don't let anyone read your first draft. Don't let anyone read your first draft while you're writing it. That first draft is for you and for no one else. And there's a few reasons for that. Part of it is to give yourself the freedom to just go and just write the story for you without criticism from other people, making you doubt what you're doing, or maybe making you feel too good about what you're doing because they think you're awesome. Just being able to write that first draft for you without any outside influences. Another part of this is to avoid the temptation to edit or revise what you're doing while you're writing the first draft. You shouldn't really be doing any kind of editing until you finish the first draft. Don't do the thing where you go back and edit the chapter from the day before you start the next chapter. You want to keep that momentum. You just want to get the story down in its rawest form. That's what the first draft is. There'll be plenty of time for editing later, believe me. Don't fall into that trap. So often when people lose steam on a book and they never finish it or they get stuck partway through, they're editing while they're going. And you don't have to see that a whole lot of times before you start to realize that's a big part of the problem. So there's no editing. You're just getting that first draft done. It can have mistakes. You can make changes partway through the first draft. Like maybe you fundamentally change a character, halfway through, or you change their name, or you add in a character that should have been there all along, but they weren't. You don't go back and fix it, or, you just keep going forward. That's, when you're doing the second draft, that's when you can fix all that stuff. But you don't do that in the first draft. And this isn't just Stephen King. A lot of successful writers will say this. All right, writing tip number 7 is go where the story leads you. Sometimes the best laid plans don't go your way. Things may not go the way that you think they will or thought they would before you started writing the book or in the earlier stages of the book. Let the story guide you and let the story take the characters where they need to be. Sometimes it can surprise you. Don't try to straitjacket your story with a plot or an outline. Now, Stephen King is very much on the side of the discovery writing part of the spectrum. I don't think I'm quite as far on that side as he is, but I've over the years become much more of a discovery writer than a planner or an outliner. And I've talked about this a lot on the show too in previous episodes, but my first novel I wrote, the last half of the novel was very difficult. I was not enjoying it by the end. I think maybe I was even hating it by the end. And I didn't write for over a decade after that, as far as writing any novels. And a big part of that was because the experience was very not fun for me for the last half of that book. And it took me over 10 years to figure it out. And it took writing another novel in a very different way to figure it out. But I finally realized that the reason I hated the last half of that book so much was because I had outlined it all. I had planned it all. All of the exciting discoveries, all of the fun parts for me as a writer happened during the outline. And by the time I finished the outline and started writing, I was already kind of getting over the book. And by the time I got the book half written, I was over it. I was ready to go on to the new thing. I was already getting excited for new ideas of new things I wanted to do. And I still had half of a book to write. I've often said it is very much like watching a movie for the 5th or 6th time. It's just not the same. It's not nearly as fun as it was the first time. So taking more of a discovery writing approach, where this last book, I started out with a beginning situation. I had some vague ideas of maybe how things would go or how things would end up, but that was it. There was no outline whatsoever. I got to discover the story as I went, and I had a lot more fun with it, and I had fun all the way through the last page, and I loved it, and I was ready to do another book right afterwards. So that's been my experience. So not only will that be more fun for you throughout the process than planning everything out ahead of time, it's also going to lead to a better book. Letting your story be limited by an outline or a plan you came up with ahead of time is often going to result in a contrived feeling, unbelievable story in which characters do things that don't make any sense, that don't fit their characters, that don't make any sense that someone would do that or say that because, quote, the plot demands it. You see this in books. You see it a lot on like TV and in movies and stuff too. You see it everywhere in all forms of storytelling. You will see this where characters will do things that don't make any sense, that are very out of character. And they're doing it because the writer or writers have a spot they want to get to in mind ahead of time, and they're forcing the characters to go there, even though it doesn't make any sense. So you can greatly avoid that by not having that plan ahead of time. Instead, focus on fleshing out your characters, making them as real to you as possible, and then let them drive the story. Follow the story where they take it. A much better question to ask yourself is, what would this character do in this situation? As a writer, as you're writing, that's a great question to ask and a great way to figure out what comes next, as opposed to asking what needs to happen next to advance the plot to the next step of my outline, right? So yeah, chances are good you're going to have a lot more fun that way, and chances are good you're going to end up with a lot better story that way. Now, I will point out here, I like to be transparent or honest as much as I can. This method is not all sunshine and roses. You will have a bit more to deal with in the editing process than you may have if you follow a very detailed outline. I remember my first book that I did outline, a lot of the editing was punctuation stuff and typos and stuff like that. And addressing issues that the beta readers, or I should say the alpha readers, found. There weren't like kind of big changes to make, where when you make this, or you take this more discovery approach, like I did in my last novel, there may be some more kind of major sweeping changes to make in the second draft, because you are kind of finding your way as you go, and you're changing things as you go without going back and retroactively fixing them. So it can be a bit more work in the revision process, but having done both, I still prefer it that way, because for me, personally, the most difficult part of writing a novel is writing that first draft. It's getting through the story, getting to the end of the story, getting it down, that first very rough version. And once I have that, turning that into something that actually works is it's much easier for me. So the discovery approach makes that first draft process easier, and more importantly, it makes it a lot more fun, and makes it much more likely I'll get to the end than if I go the other way. And, once I have that first draft done, I'm not going to give up on it during the revision process. So I don't have to worry about that. And, every book is going to take a lot of editing, no matter how you approach it, no matter how you do it anyway. It's hard to get like statistics of, does a discovery written book take longer to edit than a planned book? And if so, how much? I mean, it's really impossible to get those kind of numbers. I mean, my feeling is that this last book took a little bit more work in the editing process, but, the last book before that was also 13 years ago. So that could be totally wrong. But either way, the entire process, the writing the first draft and all the drafts since, was a lot more fun. So it's a win either way for me. All right, writing tip number 8, write great opening lines. So King kind of points out two aspects of this. One is for the benefit of the readers. You want to have great opening lines. And he says, an opening line should invite the reader to begin the story. It should say, listen, come in here. You want to know about this. And then opening lines are also good for the writer to have good ones. And he says, we've talked so much about the reader, but you can't forget that the opening line is important to the writer too, to the person who's actually boots on the ground, because it's not just the writer or the reader's way in, it's the writer's way in also. And you've got to find a doorway that fits us both. So, there's kind of two aspects here. You want a great opening line or great beginning to pull the reader in and get them interested enough to read your story, but also to get you interested. So different people approach this in different ways. Some people agonize over that first line or first few lines, in the very beginning when they're starting the story. Others worry about it later and further, in later drafts in the revision process. So, whichever way you do it, at some point, it's a good idea to really think about the very beginning and making it as strong as possible. Tip number 9, avoid adverbs. Stephen King says the adverb is not your friend. Consider the sentence, he closed the door firmly. It's by no means a terrible sentence, but ask yourself if firmly really has to be there. And, obviously it doesn't. There's not a big difference between he closed the door and he closed the door firmly. And, in the book, he goes more into this and says, if you've written the scene well, then the reader knows he closed the door firmly based on the context of what's happening in the scene. You don't need to tell him. And he makes a great point that a lot of times adverbs and also adjectives are coming from a place of fear on the part of the writer, afraid that they're not communicating well and the reader isn't clear on what's going on. So we're going to add these adverbs just in case. So yeah, you don't want to write from a place of fear. So yeah, it's good to be mindful of this when writing the first draft. I mean, I've trained myself just to notice adverbs anytime I use them. It's kind of annoying. I even notice when I'm speaking and I use an adverb, but definitely when I'm writing, I tend to notice as I'm writing that, I just use an adverb. So yeah, you can think about it when you're writing the first draft, and with practice, you're going to catch yourself before you use an adverb more and more in the first draft. But this is especially something you want to pay attention to in the revision process. An adverb can often be replaced with a better verb. And usually, or a lot of times, that's the right thing to do. And Stephen King isn't saying, and I'm not saying, never ever use adverbs. This tip is often misquoted. You'll see this online all the time. People going to war about, adverbs are part of the English language and you should be able to use them and blah, blah, blah. No one ever said never use adverbs. It's not what he said. He said the adverb is not your friend. Ask yourself, does it really need to be there? Ask yourself, is there a better way? He's not saying never do it. He uses adverbs. Everybody uses adverbs. Yeah, you probably can't find a book that doesn't have some adverbs in it. But there's definitely such a thing as too many adverbs, and it's not hard to get to that point. And yeah, 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, you have a sentence with an adverb in it, there's a better sentence than that sentence that conveys the same idea, even better in fewer words without annoying adverbs. Okay, writing tip number 10. The first word you think of is often the best word. People will argue with this, but they're frankly wrong. So you shouldn't need a thesaurus with you when you write your book. And your reader definitely shouldn't need a dictionary to read your book. As long as you have a decent working vocabulary, which comes from reading a lot, which you've already done at this point, and you're continuing to do, the first word that comes to your mind when you're writing will almost always, again, not always, but almost always be the best word. If you try to come up with other words other than that word that came to you first, those other words will often not fit your actual meaning as well as the first word you thought of. And they're probably going to sound more pretentious because it's going to be a more obscure word. If you're well-read, if you have a decent-sized vocabulary, your brain is going to offer up the best word to fit what you're trying to say automatically. That will be the first word you come up with. And, if you pull out the thesaurus and try to find another word, it's either not going to fit as well or it's just going to sound more pretentious because it's going to be a more obscure word that the reader may not even know. Now, I will say that there is one exception to this, but this, we're kind of talking about writing the first draft a lot here today. This is more a revision thing, but when you're revising, you want to avoid using the same word over and over in like the same paragraph or on the same page, or even in the same chapter. So those are times when you might want to choose a different word than the first word you came up with. But, you want to, let's say you use the same word 3 times in the same paragraph and you decide you want to replace a couple of them. You figure out which of those 3 sentences did that word fit the best, right? And then you keep that one. And then the other 2, you find something that fits as well, but it's a different word. So you're not repeating yourself. All right. Tip number 11. After you finish that first draft, let it rest in the desk drawer. So what King's talking about here is take some time away from the book before you start editing it. So you finish the first draft, put it away, don't look at it, try not to think about it for a good chunk of time in order to get some mental distance from it. This will be a huge help to you when you go to edit it later. Now, the time you're going to need for this is going to vary a bit by person, but I think it's pretty safe to say that you want at least 6 weeks, preferably more. Probably a few months is best. So taking this time away from it is going to help you when you're editing to see mistakes. If you start revising too soon, when what you meant to say when you wrote the thing is still fresh in your mind, then you're going to see that instead of what's actually on the page, right? So anytime you're writing something, you have in your mind what you're trying to say, but a lot of times the words you put on the page aren't actually what's in your mind, or not exactly. And taking that time away lets you kind of forget what you were trying to say, and lets you read the book more like you're reading something someone else wrote, and then you will see what's actually there instead of what you thought you put there. And really, that's the best metric to know, have I waited long enough to edit this? If you pick up the book and you start reading it and you remember writing it and you remember what you were thinking while you were writing it, it's too soon. When you pick up that book and you start to read it and it feels like you're reading something someone else wrote, then you've waited long enough. And it's really that simple. Also, the other thing that mental distance helps with, in addition to seeing mistakes, is it helps you be a little more objective as far as evaluating how good what you wrote is. And it's funny because it helps on both sides of the coin. Not only does it help you see things that aren't as great as you thought they were when you wrote it, it also helps you see things that are actually better than you thought they were when you wrote it. So, if you finish writing the first draft and you turn around right away and start editing, or you don't wait long enough to start editing, you're going to perceive it the way you perceived it when you wrote it. If you thought it was good when you wrote it, you're probably going to think it's good when you revise it. If you thought it was terrible when you wrote it, you will probably think it's terrible when you revise it. But if you take enough time that you forget all that, legitimately forget it, and you're not reminded of that when you're reading it, then you have a more honest reaction to what's actually on the page. And yeah, in my own writing, I've seen it both ways. I've read things that when I wrote it, I thought it was pretty good. And I read it later and I'm like, oh, this is not very good at all. I really need to rewrite this. And then I've had other things that when I wrote it, I didn't think was that great. And I read it later and I'm like, wow, this is a lot better than I thought it was. This is actually pretty good. In fact, my first book, Dawn of Endless Night, I remember there was a whole chapter, and it was kind of a chapter that went to another character's point of view. It was kind of an aside kind of thing. It was a character we hadn't seen before. And it was this whole chapter from this character's point of view. And when I wrote it, I thought it was pretty bad, to the point that I'm like, man, I'm probably just going to cut this chapter out. That was really bad. And, I took a few months off. And when I came to that to edit it, I actually really liked it. It was probably my favorite chapter in the whole book. I thought it was really great. So yeah, you never know. You never know what you'll think, but it's really good to get that distance before you edit. All right, so up to this point, we've been talking pretty much about the first draft. So now let's talk a little bit about revisions, the drafts after the first draft. So tip number 12 is, when you're ready to revise that first draft, decide what the story is about. King says, when you write a book, you spend day after day scanning and identifying the trees. When you're done, you have to step back and look at the forest. It seems to me that every book, at least every one worth reading, is about something. Your job during or just after the first draft is to decide what something or some things yours is about. Your job in the second draft, one of them anyway, is to make that something even more clear. This may necessitate some big changes and revisions. The benefits to you and your reader will be clearer focus and a more unified story. It hardly ever fails. So yeah, he said it pretty good right there. The first draft, you're just trying to get the thing out of your brain and onto the paper, right? And, maybe at some point during that first draft during writing it, you will come to discover or figure out what it's about, what its themes may be, or maybe not. But before you start the second draft, you should figure that out if you haven't already. And if you finish the book and you're still not sure what it's about, that can be something that you're looking at after you wait a few months and you start reading through it the first time and, making notes for things you want to fix or change. Ask yourself, what is this really about? What is this story really about? And once you figure that out, then you can do whatever you need to do to make that more clear and make sure everything really points that way in the story. All right, tip number 3, revise with the door open. So you remember we wrote the first draft with the door closed. We didn't let anyone read it. It's all for us as the writer. Now when we revise, the door opens. Stephen King says, when you write a story, you're telling yourself the story. When you rewrite, your main job is taking out all the things that are not the story. So another thing he says is, when you're, the first draft you write for yourself, and then with the second and later drafts, now you're starting to write it for other people. So this is a part of the process where you start to think about your ideal reader. And maybe this could have been its own point, but Stephen King makes a point of, you can't write a book to please everyone. You can't write a book for everybody. Instead, what you should do is write it for someone specific, which he calls his ideal reader. For Stephen King, it's his wife. But yeah, when you write a book, who's this book for? And, there's enough people out there that even though you're picking someone specific, might be your spouse, that person is going to represent a potential demographic of reader. So for instance, I write my book for my wife. So my book will hopefully appeal to my wife, but will also appeal to other readers like her who like the kinds of things that she likes. So that's a lot more doable than to try to write for every science fiction reader out there or for every reader out there. It's a lot easier to wrap your brain around someone well and write the book for them. So yeah, revising with the door open, the big idea here is now you're getting feedback from other people. Now, your process might look a little different than Stephen King's. It really depends, how many drafts you do and what you do with each draft. But at some point in the revision process, you're getting feedback from other people, alpha readers, beta readers, agents, editors, etc. Tip number 14, when revising, aim to cut 10%. So once you finish the first draft and you know what the story is about, chances are good there's going to be stuff in there that just doesn't belong. That isn't part of the story. You also want to remove unneeded words and make sentences and paragraphs as concise as possible. So Stephen King aims to cut about 10% in the revision process. So some ways to cut that book down, some things to think about, to cut out. Cutting out any words that aren't needed. There are going to be a lot of these in the first draft, probably. Looking for redundancies or words that don't add any meaning to the sentence that they're in. For example, one great example is the word "that" can often be cut from a sentence without changing the meaning at all. Now, sometimes, again, there's no absolutes in this. People get all bent on social media because they think there are absolutes. There are times when that is needed. And if you take that out of the sentence, it will change the meaning or it will make the meaning unclear. So if it's needed, it needs to stay. But there are a lot of times that the word "that" is not needed. You can cut it out and it doesn't change anything, except it just made your sentence one word shorter. You can replace adverbs with better verbs. So that just removed a word. Instead of a verb and an adverb, you get rid of the adverb and you replace that verb with a better verb. And now instead of 2 words, you have 1. You can, same idea, replace adjectives with better nouns. You can replace passive voice with active voice, and this will pretty much always result in a shorter sentence when you're done, because passive voice is pretty much always going to be a very convoluted, confusing, wordy sentence. And once you change it to active voice, it's going to have fewer words. and be a lot easier to understand and more evocative and all those good things that active voice does and why we avoid passive voice. Again, not saying there will never be a passive voice sentence in your book. It is part of English, but it should be very limited and very conscious when it is used. Another way to cut things down is removing scenes that don't further the story. And again, this has to do with figuring out what your story is really about. Once you do that, there's probably going to be scenes that just aren't adding to that at all. A scene should reveal character, should reveal setting, should reveal context, or should advance the plot. Ideally, each scene will do, at least a couple of these, if not all of them. Cut out any scenes that don't do any of these things. So this exact number, cutting your first draft by 10% is going to vary from writer to writer. 10% is what works for Stephen King, and he does point out that he tends to overwrite in his first draft. So editing for him is more of cutting things out that don't need to be there. I know some writers tend to underwrite in the first draft, and so the revision is a lot of adding in things that need to be there and aren't there. So, you specifically may find you need to cut more or less than 10%. But the idea here is just cutting the fat, getting rid of stuff that doesn't need to be there and isn't making the story more clear or better. So, for example, in the book I'm working on now that I'm revising now, Critical Balance, my second draft was actually pretty close in word count to the first draft. And this was because although I cut a lot out, I also added in new scenes and I also added in more descriptions. Because a lot of times in my first draft, I don't describe things a whole lot. I just am focused on action and dialogue. So part of my second draft process is adding in descriptions where I feel they're lacking. So that does add to the word count, but then I'm cutting out stuff that seems extraneous. So for me, my second draft came out about the same. Those two kind of evened out. Also, this is going to vary depending on your process and how many revisions you do and what you do with each revision. For example, I personally don't worry about things like adverbs and adjectives and passive voice and even so much extraneous words until like the fourth or fifth draft or even later. I usually address those kinds of things, really polishing the prose in the final polish revision I do right before I give it to the beta readers. So when I'm in the alpha reader stage, I'm not worried about that stuff. And this is another topic I've talked about in more detail in other episodes. But for me, an alpha reader is another writer. They are a fellow writer that is going to critique my manuscript in a fairly early draft, like second or third or fourth draft. A beta reader is someone who is not a writer or an editor. Alpha readers can also be editors, not just writers. But a beta reader is just someone who reads, preferably a lot. They're not a writer. They're not an editor. An alpha reader is a fellow writer or an editor who is getting an earlier draft and helping me to spot problems and helping me to improve things because they know the craft and they know that they have the tools in the toolbox just like I do. A beta reader is getting a later draft and they're getting something that's very close to what I'm going to send to an agent or a publisher. And from them, I'm getting a perspective of a reader, just a reader. What do you think as a reader? Do you like this? What do you like? What do you don't like? What confuses you? Things like that. So I'm not worried about, the adverbs and the adjectives and the passive voice and making the prose as concise as possible in the alpha reader phase, because these are fellow writers who can understand where I am in the process, understand that I'm not worried about that stuff right now. And also the alpha phase is when we're going to deal with any big problems that exist in the book. So very often in the alpha phase, there are going to be large revisions. There may be entire chapters that are cut out. There may be entire chapters that are added in. There may be multiple chapters that are completely rewritten, things like that. So from an efficiency point of view, it doesn't make much sense to go through word by word, line by line, sentence by sentence, and make everything as pretty as possible when I'm going to be doing huge changes. And, I could spend 3 hours editing a chapter that I end up cutting out. So, I don't do any of that stuff until right before it goes to the betas, because usually at that stage, the big changes have been made, and it's, as far as the structure, it's pretty much what it's going to be. And now we're just doing really the fine polished stuff. So, it just saves a lot of time not to worry about that really kind of prose, making the prose tight and all that kind of stuff until towards the end. So yeah, I'm not giving the book to betas until at least the 4th or 5th draft, probably even later than that. So that's when I would worry about, adverbs, adjectives, passive voice, extraneous words, things like that. And our final tip, number 15, is if you don't succeed, get a bigger nail. Also listen to critics. So if you know much about Stephen King, or you've read On Writing, you know the anecdote that this comes from. But he says, by the time I was 14 and shaving twice a week, whether I needed to or not, the nail in my wall, which he put all his rejections on, he had a nail on the wall of his bedroom that every time he sent in a story and he got a rejection back, he would put it on this nail. By the time he was 14, the nail in my wall would no longer support the weight of rejection slips impaled upon it. I replaced the nail with a spike and went on writing. So what he's saying here really is keep at it. Rejections are going to come and they're going to pile up, whether you kind of go the traditional route and you're starting out writing shorter forms of fiction and you're submitting to magazines and whatnot. You're going to get lots and lots of rejections. Or, if you're just going straight to novels and you're starting to send your manuscript out to agents or acquisitions editors, you're going to get lots of rejections. It's just a part of the biz. And, it's just part of it. You just got to deal with it. It's part of being a writer. And the sooner you can learn to cope with that, the better you're going to be. So yeah, you just got to realize that it's part of it. Everybody goes through it. Every author you see in the bookstore, they went through it. I don't think anyone got published the first time they submitted. And everybody goes through it, and don't get discouraged. If you get any feedback, a lot of times these rejections are just, sorry, this isn't what we're looking for. But if you do get any kind of feedback, in addition to that, like anything specific that they didn't like or anything like that, learn what you can from it and just keep going. So the second part of this, other than if you don't succeed, get a bigger nail, which means just keep going, don't give up. The other part is to listen to critics. Stephen King says, what's the worst advice? Don't listen to the critics. I think that you really ought to listen to the critics because sometimes they're telling you something is broken that you can fix. I think the advice, don't listen to the critics, is a sort of defensive thing that says if you stick your head in the sand, you won't have to hear any bad news and you won't have to see any bad news and you won't have to change what you're doing. But if you listen, sometimes you can get out of a bad habit. So, it sounds like what he's really referring to here is actual critics, professionals who critique novels and whatnot. But I would add to this just reviews, whether they're reviews on Amazon or Goodreads or anywhere else. It really amazes me how often I hear writers say that they don't read any reviews, or they don't read negative reviews. They only read the 5-star reviews. Of course, caveat, when we're talking people online, which is mostly what I'm talking about here, these are often writers where I don't know anything about them. I don't know if they're published. I don't know, with an actual publisher, or if they're independently published, or if they're not published at all and they've never published anything. You don't know who these people are a lot of times. But for a published writer to say this, someone published, with an actual publisher, to say this is a little mystifying to me. And I have heard writers that I know are published with a publisher say this or something like it. Remember the get a bigger nail thing. If you're a published writer, then you have endured in your past countless rejections. They all have. It's part of the game. You've likely endured critiques from alpha readers, writing groups, beta readers, editors, and agents. So if you're a published writer, you should have a pretty thick skin by now. You should be used to criticism, some of it harsh, some of it unfair, some of it angry, all these things. You should be used to it. You should be able to handle reviews, both positive and negative. As commercial writers, we're performers in a way, when you think about it. We aim to entertain. That's our purpose. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to write books that entertain people. So for a performer to show no interest in how the audience is receiving the performance, in other words, for a writer to not care what readers think of the book that they wrote, just mystifies me. To me, part of the professional writing gig is being able to handle criticism in all its forms. So this means not letting the negative criticism get you down. It also means not letting the positive criticism go to your head. Like, that's part of the job. Like, it's a skill you kind of got to learn to be successful, I feel like, and to stay sane and be psychologically healthy. You got to learn to take the good and the bad criticism and not let either one of those affect you in a negative way or affect what you're trying to do too much, but still learning what can be learned from it. Being able to sift out those few useful nuggets from all those criticisms to improve your craft. So in my mind, ignoring reviews is a huge missed opportunity. And to those of you listening to this show that are maybe new to this or getting started, or you're still waiting to, quote, make it, don't do that to yourself. Learn it now. Learn those skills now. Every once in a while, a reviewer will know what they're talking about. Every once in a while, you're going to get someone that actually knows what they're talking about, and you could actually learn something and improve at what you're doing. So why would you deny yourself that opportunity? All right, that is it. That is the 15 tips that I pulled out of On Writing to share with you today, and my thoughts on them. And probably goes without saying, but I agree with all of these, or I wouldn't be talking about them. So I think you could do a lot worse than taking this advice. If you have anything you'd like to add to this discussion today, I would love to hear from you. You can email me at lexoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at LexStarWalker, and you can call my voicemail 951-465-5391. If you have any other tips that you'd like to share with writers, maybe Stephen King and I missed something really important today, call my voicemail and we can share your thoughts with the listeners. Finally, join our community on Discord. You can find a link to that in the show notes at lexstarwalker.com/LOL. And yeah, you can join us on Discord, talk about the show, talk about your writing, what you're working on, talk about books you enjoy, movies you enjoy, TV shows you enjoy, video games you enjoy, music you enjoy, all kinds of stuff. We have all kinds of stuff that we talk about on the Discord server. So you, again, can find a link to that and to other things I mentioned in the show today in the show notes at lexstarwalker.com/LOL. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope this was useful to you, or at least entertaining. And yeah, see you again soon with another episode. And until then, keep writing.